Games take time. In fact, we want them to take time. We want to get our money's worth. And sometimes we love our long games, sometimes we don't. But hey, today let's talk about some games that take a while. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on Game Ranks, 10 recent, extremely long games that take 100 plus hours to 100%. That is a friggin' mouthful. And these games are absolutely the equivalent of a mouthful. Starting off with number 10, it's Expeditions, a Mud Runner game. If you're unfamiliar with the Mud Runner and Snow Runner games, you're probably wondering how this thing could be one of the longest games of the year. You'd think the premise of driving through mud would get old after a while, or even just run out of reasons to continue doing, even if it does get old. I mean, we've all played games that get old and we keep going anyways, but apparently not. If you want to fully complete this game, it's going to take just over 100 hours to do it. The thing about these games is they require a lot of slow movement and careful planning. You're not just rocketing through checkpoints like a standard open world driving game. Every mud-covered stretch of road or rocky piece of terrain is like a puzzle to solve, and it requires a lot of patience to make any kind of progress. It's a very zen game in that way, while still offering the usual open-world activities that you might expect, plenty of checklist clearing, and we know that does make these kinds of games appealing to a certain kind of gamer that gets a dopamine hit whenever they see the completion percentage on a map go up. The funny thing about Expeditions is that it's long as hell, but it's nothing compared to SnowRunners. It's like twice as long to beat that one. Expeditions, a Mud Runner game, is meant to be the more streamlined entry in the series, and it takes 100 hours to clear it. And like the old games, they keep adding DLC maps and new stuff that, it extends its longevity and has you going into caves, and it's not a game where you just can zone out either. These games require a lot more concentration than like a truck driving simulator because, mud is tough, man. They are similar podcast fodder games that are fun to pop in and make some progress every once in a while, or if you are a completionist, maniacally obsessed for several weeks straight, in which you get minimal amounts of sleep and put off an absolutely demented vibe to everyone in your life. I am going to finish my dinner quickly so I can tackle the mud. And number 9 is Metaphor ReFantazio. I don't know about you, but I expected this one actually to be a lot longer. It's in many ways a spiritual follow-up to Persona 5, and we all know how brutally long those games can get. I'm not saying this game isn't extremely long. It absolutely is. On average, this game takes about 80 hours plus to finish. If you're playing normally, so it requires some serious commitment, but going from beating it to completion isn't actually all that much extra work. According to HowLongToBeat.com, completely finishing Metaphor is going to take around 104 hours total. By the way, I am using that as my guide because, well, I'm just going to be clear with you here. I don't often actually 100% games at this point. And on top of that, actual completion times can vary pretty wildly between people. So averaging it out, I think that's probably the best resource for that. I've spent more than 100 hours on a lot of games that I haven't gotten anywhere close to completion. And you probably have too. Frankly, though, the website can sometimes way overestimate how long it takes to finish something, or underestimate it quite a bit as well. But this is what we have to work with. Again, I beat this game. I did not beat it in 100 hours. I did not complete it. But 104 hours sounds pretty accurate.
Are you prepared?
Metaphor is kind of a lot like Persona, where the actual meat of the game is very, very long, and there's not a lot of optional content per se. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a different kind of design philosophy, though. You don't see it that often anymore. There's usually tons of optional things to do in games. Case in point, the next entry on the list.
All right, how's that? Let's take them all out. Not done yet.
Which is number 8, Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. Yeah, if you want to fully complete this game, it actually takes longer than Metaphor, about 115 hours or so. And I believe it, because the amount of stuff you can do in this game is absolutely overwhelming. There's a main story, which is pretty long on its own. Actually pretty similar to Metaphor's length, if you're not going completionist route, but about 11 hours longer if you do. And if you're doing that, you're doing all the Yakuza side stuff, like the arcade games and the side stories, various gambling mini games on top of all that. And there's two of the biggest major side activities in the entire series with Sujimon, where you can capture, train, and battle all these freaks and weirdos you run into on the streets of Hawaii in an absurd parody of Pokemon.
You're finished. Huge damage.
And then there's also the entire Dondako Island thing. I mean, it's Animal Crossing, but with a barbed wire baseball bat. It's a lot. Clearing out Dondako Island doesn't actually take that long, maybe 10 or so hours, but it's just a drop in the deep well of content that is this game. Totally optional stuff also. It's really fun to engage with this stuff, though. Yakuza games always take a long time to complete because their metrics for completion are usually extremely strict and require you to do pretty much everything until you get sick of it. And Infinite Wealth is not different than that. There is just more stuff than ever in this one. I mean, it's a JRPG, and they made it a JRPG. And number 7 is the first Descendant. It's Warframe, but swap out biomech ninjas for anime babes. That kind of just sells itself as is. That's a premise that a lot of the gaming community can get behind. It's not bad for what it is, despite being blatant bait and overpriced microtransactions to go along with it. The funny thing about this game is that, well, completing the available content does take a while. For a completionist, it'll take about 130 hours to do everything there is to do. And for a live service game, the first Descendant actually isn't that long. The whole point of these things is to keep players engaged and playing for as long as possible, but if you're able to finish all the content in less than a month, there's not much reason to keep players coming back. Obviously, you can just run through the campaign again, focus on grinding for extra costumes or whatever, but 130 hours for what's supposed to be a forever game isn't really going to cut it. And that's probably why the player base shrunk hard after the first month. There's not really a lot to do to keep people playing indefinitely. I mean, if all you're here to do is jump in, do everything, and bounce, it's a great deal for $0. For the price of nothing, over 100 hours of gameplay is a great deal. But at that number, there will be a lot of grinding and repetition. Just beating the game normally only takes about 60 hours in comparison. So, yeah, the depth of the content for a full-price game isn't really here. But if you need something to fill the time, hey, you could do a lot worse.
Huh? I just got here. What's going on? Kingston being invaded?
And number 6 is Fantasian Neo Dimension, originally released for iOS in episodic form back in 2021. This game from Mistwalker, the Final Fantasy guys studio, got expanded and updated and re-released in 2024, and that's the version of the game we're looking at now. What's interesting about this game is how varied the playtimes can get. How Long to Beat lists the main story at 21 hours, notably short for a modern JRPG. These things are usually behemoths. But that's probably from rushing, because the average person rests at closer to 65 or so hours. But if you want to truly finish it, you're talking 142 hours, which is a huge time investment, more than double the playtime. There's a metric ton of extra content in this game, but what's unique about it is it's not a bunch of extra modes or mini games or anything. It's just more game. More side quests, more optional areas, more bonus bosses, whole lot of optional stuff that can freely be ignored, but you'll seriously be missing out if you skip all of it, because some of the best stuff in the game is hidden away in the optional content. Really, any excuse to more fully explore these beautiful diorama backgrounds is fine by me. Such a strange thing that they hand built all these backgrounds, but it really gives the game a unique flavor. I'm here for it, you know? And At number 5 is Stalker 2, Heat of Chernobyl. Who'd have guessed Stalker 2 of all games would end up being one of the longest games of the year? 2024 was absolutely a year where maybe the games were a little bit shorter, but that doesn't mean we didn't have some pretty long ones. Stalker, the original, took about 20 hours tops. Wasn't that long of a game, so I wasn't really ready for this. I certainly wasn't ready to believe people saying stuff like this. Then I played the game, and now I know. It's massive. For average players, it's going to take around 65 hours to finish the game, especially if you're not using mods to bump up your inventory weight, so you end up spending half the game slowly trundling around in the dark because you're over-encumbered. The map is very big. There's very few safe zones, and fast travel's rare, so you're doing a whole lot of walking back and forth with Stalker 2. On top of the game being extremely as long as it is, the story just keeps going and going. You have no idea really what's going on, but stuff happens. It keeps happening. The main reason the game is so long is the map. It's just big, very large, and a lot of it is entirely optional. If you want to complete the game, it means scouring every inch of the map for stashes and loot. It's exhausting, it takes forever, and you will die from a random bloodsucker attack when you're not paying attention. But hey, if you want a long open-world FPS, Stalker 2 is a solid pick. It doesn't end, and it's Stalker 2. It's great. It's a very good game. I have not played it for 144 hours, though.
Tired, are you? I'll help you rest in peace.
I'm hiding here. Got a little present for you.
And number 4 is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. After the relatively short and linear Final Fantasy VII remake, I assumed Part 2 would be similar, and I was wrong. I mean, the gameplay is similar, but Rebirth might be one of the most overloaded, bloated beasts of a game I've seen in a while. It's both incredible and kind of infuriating to, I mean, depending on who you are, possibly equal measures. There's too much stuff in this game for some people. And it's not like Yakuza where it feels like a leisurely stroll and you just kind of stop when you want to. Rebirth, you are just being pummeled with stuff, more stuff at every turn. All that stuff, it's extremely high quality. Even the most generic open world activities get a little extra spice inserted into them, make them more exciting, but man, it's overwhelming. You want to finish Rebirth, fully finish it. It's 168 hours. Keep in mind, the amount of story this game covers is 7 or 8 hours of the original Final Fantasy VII. It gets to the end of Disc 1 out of 3. This game really embraces the open world with all the mini-games and Ubisoft-style map clearing it entails. The difference is the amount of variety on display. Each region has its own major mini-game. There's Costa del Sol, the Golden Saucer. It's got a card game that rivals Gwent in addictiveness. Has its own huge tournament and story arc. There's multiple tournaments and VR challenges and hard mode that completely alters how you play the game. It just keeps going. And it sounds like a petty complaint to say the game's like too much of a good thing. Because you're buying a game, you want your money's worth, and it's good. It just feels like there's maybe too much of it. I mean, you don't have to actually play everything in the game, though. You can just, go through it. That's what I did. I did some of the optional stuff, not all of it. I could go back to it at any time if I wanted. And number 3 is Balatro, a highly addictive roguelike game. It's a game you can spend thousands of hours on just for fun, but in terms of completion, it only takes a little bit less than that to fully finish. If you're the type that likes to clear all the achievements, beating it can happen in a matter of minutes if you know what you're doing. How long to beat estimates the average playtime to get a clear around 7 hours, so you're just finishing the game normally. You can see some pretty massive variations depending on the player. I imagine clear times are similar, but either way, it's going to take like 202 hours on average to do everything, like unlock every Joker, complete all the achievements. That's a long time for any game, but when you're talking about Balatro, it's almost almost a drop in the bucket compared to how much time casual players will spend just doing runs for fun. It's one of the rare instances where the completionist is probably finishing the game earlier than the average player because their priorities are just completely different. Your average roguelike player doesn't care about winning or losing. They're just playing a game for a few minutes to fill time on a fairly regular basis. At number 2 is Satisfactory. Finally released out of early access in 2024, Satisfactory is one of the rare survival crafting factory games with an actual end goal, just like, not just like, but kind of like Subnautica. The game puts you in a pre-made open world planet in one of 4 locations and tasks you with building a massive factory to process materials, unlock new blueprints, and even build more complex and advanced machines until you eventually have this planet-spanning infinite factory built with your own 2 hands. It's a laborious, complex, and time-consuming game, to say the least, but it is satisfying. They put that in the name for a good reason. It's all about building up more and more complicated resource chains and automating everything so your factory is essentially running itself while everything is finally set up. When it gets to that point, it's honestly pretty incredible. Getting to that point takes serious work, though. Normally, you're going to take around 139 hours. Normally, and if you're a completionist that wants to unlock all the achievements and do everything in the game, it's going to take around 212 hours, and that's if you're dedicated and focused. For guys like me that restart their factories over and over for aesthetic reasons, it's going to take significantly longer than that if you ever get to that point. I don't know. It's a game that takes a long time to do anything, and there's a lot of stuff to do. And finally, at number 1, UFO 50. Is this cheating? I mean, technically it's 50 separate games, but you can't buy them separately. They're all exclusive to this collection. It's a single purchase. So while there's a little bit of a cheat, because in the end, I'm talking the collected playtimes of a whole bunch of games and adding them together. But this was always meant to just be one singular thing, if you get what I mean. The whole point of UFO 50 is to make a game that captures the feel of those old 101 demo discs and crap like Action 52, but actually good. So 50 games in one package. Not all of them are games you can finish. Many are multiplayer only, but still, that's a hell of a lot of games, right? They're not all just really basic Atari-style space shooters. Some of them are feature-complete indie games on all their own. I mean, there's an entire Metroidvania in there full of esoteric secrets. And that's not the only game with hidden depths. There's basic ones with strange and difficult to uncover things hidden inside of them. Overall, playtime's very wildly here. I'm talking as low as 57 or so hours, all the way up to, and I'm serious here, 321 hours. That's one of the longest completion times I've ever seen in a game, and if you're not the type that's great at the kind of throwback games that appear in this collection, I could see it taking way longer, depending on certain things. Remember, 321 is the average for the full-ass completionist thing. I'll repeat it, that's just one of the longest times I've ever seen for, completing a game. It's a cheap indie novelty, tons of depth. Some of these games are just full-on games, and then there's the whole secret meta aspect of the game, the fake built-in Gemini function, the rabbit hole. I mean, it just keeps going and going. It's a game that you can very much get lost in because it's very old school, and they don't explain a lot to you. A lot of the games are intentionally archaic in design in a way that makes them even harder and more inscrutable. It's a massive quote-unquote game that you can spend a few hours screwing around in and get your money's worth, but if you really want to obsess over it, it's going to take you months. I do have a few bonus games for you that came out in 2024 that do take over 100 hours to complete. I mostly took them out to avoid repetition. A lot of them are JRPGs, so they're JRPG long. So here's the best of the rest. Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance, the re-release of this game, added a whole new story mode along with the post-launch DLC and improvements. As usual, these games are long, but this one in particular is long. To fully take it out, all the new super bosses, all the fleshed out story, it's 105 hours. It's right up there with Metaphor in terms of length. Next is The Legend of Heroes Trails Through Daybreak. The Legend of Heroes series has been going strong for decades now, and what makes them so unique is that they've been telling one long, unbroken story the whole time. Characters introduced in the early game's age evolve and take on new roles in the state of the world as the story changes, and so do the games. The newest game here in the West is Daybreak. It's kind of a jumping on point for newcomers. You don't really need to have played the many games before to have a general understanding of what's going on, but, I mean, yeah. They may not be the most technically impressive things out there, but they do what they need to, and they remain pretty solid, and most importantly, they're very long. Trails Through Daybreak, no exception. Just beating the game normally takes 80 plus hours. You want to complete it, that's 112. Somehow that's longer than the two other infamously long JRPGs on this list, both Metaphor and Shin Megami Tensei 5. Have I mentioned JRPGs are long? And finally, Wuthering Waves, a free-to-play action RPG. It's mostly compared to Genshin Impact in terms of what it is, but there's more action in it. It's one of those forever games with gacha elements that are meant to keep people grinding and playing for the rest of their life. But in the game's case here, there's a solid jumping-off point that doesn't actually take all that long to hit. You can beat the game normally in less than 50 hours, but if you want to complete it, at least in its current state, it's going to take about 128, which is a lot for a standard game, but compared to Genshin, it's actually nothing, which might be a good thing depending on how you look at it.